Hey, this is Zach Log the Great, and I am here tonight with my friend Nate
Hello again.
and with the esteemed author John C. Wright. Hello? Say hello, sir.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
And we are here to talk about Robert E. Howard's poem, Solomon Kane's Homecoming. Um, and Well, my own performance is going to be up in a couple of weeks. Nate, would you be interested? Would you want to give a reading, or shall we leave that to Mr. Wright?
I actually don't have the text of it in front of me, so let's leave that to Mr. Wright.
Okay. Go ahead then if
I'd,
you'd like to.
I'd be happy to. I would be happy to, but I'm getting a really weird echo on my machine. Are you guys hearing anything? I'm hearing your voice re-echo after about a second and a half.
No, I'm not hearing anything from you.
No, it's not showing up on my end either.
Okay, I think I think I know what I'm doing wrong.
Oh,
Here.
you have the window with the live stream up.
Okay, that was the error. That's a user error on my side. I do, in fact, also have the text right in front of me, so allow me to read it, if you will.
Go ahead.
Solomon Kane's Homecoming. The white gulls wheeled above the cliffs. The air was slashed with foam. The long tides moaned along the strand when Solomon Kane came home. He walked in silence, strange and dazed, through the little Devon town. His gaze, like a ghost's come back to life, roamed up the streets and down. The people followed wonderingly to mark his spectral stare, and in the tavern silently they thronged about him there. He heard as a man hears in a dream the worn old rafters creak, and Solomon lifted his drinking jack and spoke as a ghost might speak. Sorry for the interruption there.
No problem.
There sat Sir Richard Granville once. In smoke and flame he passed. And we were 1 to 53, but we gave them blast for blast. From crimson dawn to crimson dawn we held the dawns at bay. The dead littered on our decks, our masts were shot away. We beat them back with broken blades, till crimson ran the tide. Death thundered in the cannon smoke when Richard Grenville died. We should have blown her hull apart and sunk beneath the main. The people saw upon his wrists the scars of the racks of Spain. Where is Bess? Said Solomon Kane. Woe that I caused her tears. In a churchyard quiet by the sea, she has slept these 7 years. The sea wind mowed at the window pane, and Solomon bowed his head. Ashes to ashes and dust to dust, the fairest fade, he said. His eyes were mystical deep pools that drowned unearthly things, and Solomon lifted up his head and spoke of his wanderings. Mine eyes have looked on sorcery in dark and naked lands, horror born of the jungle gloom and death on the pathless sands. And I have known a deathless queen in the city old as death, where towering pyramids of skulls her glory witnesseth. Her kiss was like an adder's fang with the sweetness Lilith had, and her red-eyed vassals howled for blood in that city of the mad. And I have slain a vampire shape that sucked a black king white. And I have roamed through grisly hills where dead men walked at night. And I have seen their heads fall like fruit in a slaver's barracoon. And I have seen winged demons fly, all naked in the moon. My feet are weary of wandering, and age comes on apace. I fain would dwell in Devon now, forever in my place. The howling of the ocean pack came whistling down the gale, and Solomon Kane threw up his head like a hound that snuffs a trail. Adown the wind came running pack, the hounds of the ocean bayed, and Solomon Kane rose up again and girt his Spanish blade. In his cold eye, in his strange cold eyes, a vagrant gleam grew wayward and blind and bright. And Solomon put the people by and went into the night. A wild moon roared on the wild white clouds, and the waves and white crests flowed. When Solomon Kane went forth again, and no man knew his road. They glimpsed him etched against the moon, where clouds on hilltop thinned, and they heard an eerie echoed call that whistled down the wind. The end.
Okay, so one thing quick, since there's actually
Too bad this is live. I'd like to clean that up in post-production.
If you'd actually like to, I probably could cut. Well, yeah, I probably could cut that and make it a little prettier and send you a sound file.
No, that's okay. I don't want to hear the sound of my own voice reading.
But so there's actually 3 poems by Robert E. Howard about Solomon Kane. There's the One Black Stain, there's this one, and then there's the Return of Sir Richard Grenville. One kind of funny thing about them, in the context of like the entire set of stories about the character, I find it kind of funny that in the poems he consistently links Solomon Kane to real historical characters and real historical events, but I don't recall him doing that in any of the stories, which it's like, it's a kind of funny, it strikes me as a little odd that he does that with the poems but not the stories. So Nate, what since you weren't just reading for about 5 minutes, would you like to start us off?
Yeah. I gotta take this from the perspective of the good folks of Devon, who are gonna be sitting around looking at something like, seriously, he came home a mad fellow. What's going on here? I mean, none of that can be true, right? I mean, apparently his torture at the hands of the Spaniards was, protracted and terrible, and it broke his mind.
I think the people of Devon, if they lived in Robert E. Howard's universe, probably were well aware that there were more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt up in their philosophy.
That's possible, but
it depends on what.
Because in the end, the hearsay and the legends can, fail to penetrate at times. You're like,
what year does this take place? Wasn't there still witch hunters hunting witches in England at that time? They believed in the supernatural.
So this would be
one man can go and see it all.
Yeah, this would have to be late 16th or early 17th century. So, and in terms of like whether the other people would believe any of this, it kind of depends. Like, because you can have, like, if you look at science fiction, fantasy, you can have worlds where there's all this kind of stuff going on, but like most of the ordinary people have no idea about any of it. And if someone tries to explain it to them, they do think he's crazy. Or you can have worlds where, like, there's this kind of stuff going on, and even though most people haven't seen any of it, they kind of have an awareness. So I don't know which would be more.
I think they would look into the haunted eyes of Solomon Kane, and no one would dare call the man a liar to his face. And so deep down in their hearts, they'd feel a cold, cold chill and know that perhaps he spoke the truth. That's my theory.
What was that?
So I also found it interesting that we're going to bring, Lilith into this, and this, this pagan city filled with red-eyed madmen and, pyramids of skulls. Said to be, the first wife of Adam, and in some cultures the first vampire, in some cultures a succubus, but altogether not a generally wholesome character. And so, yeah, of course she's presiding over a city older than death, because if she's Adam's first wife, she was there before the fall.
He didn't say she was Lilith. He said her kiss was like that of Lilith.
Meaning as alluring as the kiss of a succubus. He was saying she was really attractive.
I would say that.
Deadly and attractive. She was a femme fatale, the way the French would phrase it.
But yeah, but I'm saying that, the deathless queen in her death, her city older than death with the fatal kiss of Lilith might have actually been her. And Solomon just didn't want to presume,
Technically, she would have to be older than Adam if she's going to be older than death, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Or at least the same age.
Let's see. So, another thing about this one, which the one black stain doesn't do, this poem does refer to several of the stories that Robert Howard had written. So, the one with the vampire queen is the Moon of Skulls, and Robert E. Howard liked to have skulls in his titles. I mean, if you're writing pulp fiction, that makes sense. I mean, that's a grabbing kind of word. So the Moon of Skulls is that city. Hills of the Dead is the other one.
It's the place where the dead walk at night.
Right, and he killed. And he killed a vampire slew a vampire shape that sucked a black king white. The Footfalls Within is I assume, I don't recall that one as much, but that appears to be the one with the slavers. And Wings in the Night is the story with the winged demons flying all naked in the moon, which he also concluded must have been the same creatures or the same race of creatures that were the harpies that harassed. I lost
Argonauts.
his name. Yeah, well, and what's the... It's an epic poem about the founding of Rome.
Virgil's Aeneid.
Aeneid, yeah. I think they were in the Aeneid as well. Maybe? Anyway.
I believe they were. I believe that Virgil copied from the... paid homage to Homer and copied many of the same elements.
Yeah, stealing from other... Sorry?
Well, I mean, it's all kind of the same world. It's like shared universe fiction because they share a seed, for God's sake.
Yeah, there we go.
The epic poet cinematic universe, or
the extended universe. Because I think Milton's in the same universe also, which would bring us back to Lilith and Adam. And now, if they're in the same universe as Robert E. Howard, they're in trouble because, as best I can tell from reading his Conan stories and his cult stories, that's firmly in the Cthulhu mythos. Because there's Thagawa and other Cthulhu myth demons that these guys run into. So,
what was yeah,
so the people of Devon, the people of Devon had better not find out these things are real, otherwise they'll go mad. We know what happens to people who find out about the truth in the Cthulhian mythos universe. Even the truth is scary there.
Oh, there you go. You see, that's why he got up and left. It wasn't like, oh, hey, there's some kind of thing going on in the night. He's like, oh, wait, crap. I better get out of here before they realize what I'm saying is actually true.
I got to save him.
Can't stay in Devon.
Well,
now, of course, since Gulliver had just been there the week before, they thought his tales were really calm by contrast. I mean, sailors' tales were a common thing where they had seen extraordinary sights, and prone to exaggeration, I'm sure. In fact, he does exaggerate in this poem. I hate to say it for someone, man as honest as Solomon Kane. He says he was outnumbered 53 to 1. He was only outnumbered 25 or so to 1. Because I looked it up.
Okay, well, okay.
He's talking about a real fight. He's talking about a real fight where Richard Granville died.
It was the captain of the ship Revenge.
Captain of the ship Revenge. The same ship that the Dread Pirate Roberts later sails.
I really do want to know if, is it Golding? The guy who wrote The Princess Bride, I want to know if he stole that name.
William Goldman.
If he took the name from Sir Grenville, or whether it was just independent and it's just a coincidence.
Well, I have been looking up the names of famous pirate ships, and more than one was called the Revenge. The Queen Anne's Revenge, for example.
But that was a real event. The one I saw did say it was one ship versus 53. It's called the Battle of Flores.
Correct. Well, it's not. Excuse me. It wasn't. It wasn't that he was outnumbered by 53 ships. It was that he was outnumbered 53-1 in terms of the men. If for the number of ships, I just looked it up in preparation for this podcast. Let me see if I can find it again where I saw it. Grenville was sent with a squadron of 15 vessels to intercept a Spanish treasure fleet off the Azores when 53 Spanish vessels approached to protect the treasure ships. So it's 15 to 53 in terms of the ship numbers. The English retreated, but Grenville delayed and was cut off. Undaunted, he attempted to run his ship, the Revenge, through the Spanish line. After 15 hours of hand-to-hand combat against 15 Spanish galleons and a force of 50,000 men, the Revenge, with her 190-man crew, was captured. A few days later, the wounded Grenville died on board the Spanish flagship.
Jeez.
Now,
15 hours of hand-to-hand combat.
I have done fencing when I was in college, and 5 minutes is about my limit. These men were made of sterner stuff than am I. 15 hours. And if you count up the numbers I just recited, they're outnumbered about 25-1 in terms of manpower.
Oh,
and the reason
it was only 25-1. Wimps.
Solomon is exaggerating because he's a sailor. It's, he's telling the complete truth. But we know from his other stories he's telling the complete truth about everything else, But the Devonese are not going to believe that. But they'll believe the 53-1 thing, but they're wrong. It was only 25-1. So there.
But,
well, all those years later, and after all the, the frankly probably more terrible things he's seen, it's kind of like, memory slips a little. Remember, it's only a lie if if you already know you're wrong and say it anyway. Otherwise, well, you're just wrong.
Also,
I believe people who tell tales in taverns are allowed to exaggerate under the same license that lets poets copy from each other in their shared universes.
That's actually what I think. If you're in a bar and you're trying to get someone to buy you a drink, it doesn't count as a lie. I think that's somewhere in the catechism.
I believe it is. But, of course, he's a Puritan, so he doesn't follow the catechism. In fact, the Catholics are his enemy. They're the ones who tortured him. Boo, Catholics!
Oh, yeah. Didn't think about that.
Yep. Now, I've heard people speculate that the best he refers to is Queen Elizabeth, which I think is a ridiculous speculation. When I read the poem, it didn't sound to me that way at all. It's clearly a local girl. He's sorry that he caused her pain, and he comes back. It was homecoming, and finds out she's been dead for 7 years. It's just a sad and very human moment. Oddly enough, he doesn't have that many human moments like that in the short stories, because here we're seeing him at home. We're kind of seeing him when he's off stage, as it were, when he's not geared up for battle.
Yeah. No, the idea that it was Queen Elizabeth I'm like, that occurred to me and then I dismissed it immediately because I was like, yeah, no. I said, why is she buried in a grave in Devon, of all places? Isn't she still the queen?
She got up again. It was Mary Queen of Scots who buried her there. It was 7 years ago. She got up again and is now ruling England as a immortal witch queen. It's just one of those sad things. That didn't get into the history books.
So, one thing that I was thinking about while I was working on memorizing this, it reminds me a little bit of Alfred Lord Tennyson's Ulysses. Do you guys know the one I'm referring to?
I know the one you're referring to. I couldn't recite off the top of my head, but I know that he Ulysses, in the Ulysses poem, in the Tennyson poem, Ulysses says that he's had some savage men domesticated, but now he still wants to go out again to sea one last time.
Well, and the thing is, I actually was going to do that one earlier. That was one I had thought about doing for my poetry series. And then I started working on it, and I'm like, I was working on the first 5 or 10 lines. I'm like, I kind of hate this guy. I don't want to do this poem. Because he's like, oh, I roll over a bunch of savage morons, and I've got this old woman for a wife. Why should I stick around here? And I'm like, You have responsibilities.
You may hate him or you may not, but I'll point out that Ulysses is one of the few kings who, when he was gone, his men all tried to seduce his wife, marry her, and replace him. And when they found out who he was, they didn't bow the knee. They said, "Hey, it's Ulysses. Let's kill him." And then he and his son, by themselves, killed everyone in the hall. So, he might still be a little antsy about that.
Those guys had families.
Well, their moms should have raised him better. That's all I can say.
Yeah.
Besides, Athena came down and said everything was okay. And if the pagan goddess says it's okay, it must be all right, right? Isn't that the way it works?
But
at the very end of the poem.
It actually reminds me a little bit of something I read a long time ago by Orson Scott Card, commenting on one of his own books. And he said that, like, the hero in our stories is almost always, by definition, in terms of their behavior, in terms of their place in society, an adolescent. Because you can't go out and do these things. Like, okay, an adolescent, in terms of their place in society, is someone who is not part of the family, does not have these ties holding him to this place and to these people. And, and so if you have your hero going out and doing these things, either he doesn't have those ties, or he does and he's neglecting him, which makes him kind of an awful person.
Well, in this particular poem, you notice that when Solomon Kane, the adventurer, comes home again, he inquires about the ties that he broke. And we don't know why he left. I don't think it's in any story as to what set him off on his adventures, is it? Because I don't remember that.
Well, isn't that in that movie where they tell about how he started on his adventures?
I only saw the first 4 minutes of the movie when Solomon Kane was in a monastery studying Zen Buddhism before getting cursed or something. And I didn't actually see through the end of it because something happened to my TV. Someone threw a beer can at it or something. I'm not exactly sure what. The memory is hazy. In my brief.
I'm sorry. I knew you.
You knew I'd rise to the bait. Yes. Yeah, because we're so. No, I did not see that movie. And I don't know why. I don't know why if there's any logic or lore as to what in the continuity as to why Solomon Kane left home. But he can't go back again. His girl is dead. His the commander he liked has been killed by the Spaniards.
Well, and also, like, at the end of this, like, there's this wind that comes through, and, like, he's like, I'm tired. I just want to stop. I just want to retire. I just want to have a normal life. And then he basically gets pulled back out again, and he's not allowed, kind of like to just be a normal person. And it's kind of sad. Like,
Now, do you believe the Nate Winchester theory that it's because he knows something horrific is coming and he wants to spare the townspeople? Or do you think, because my theory is he smells or hears something which his monster hunting senses are acute to, which the ordinary muggles, the ordinary people don't notice. And so he goes out to go do some slaughter in the name of the Lord, against some beastie that needs killing.
Two things. This is not Nate Winchester. This is a different Nate.
Oh, I'm sorry. Which Nate is this?
Do you want? I'll let him say if he wants to give his last name. That is up to him.
This is Nate Ellender. Yes.
Okay. I apologize. I was confused. Right. I was confused between this and another podcast.
You're good, man.
Yeah.
You're all right.
But yeah, I had gone with he had picked up something that was going on. He had smelled or heard something that was, danger out there, and he gets called back. No,
you got to say something eldritch, because that's a word that Howard likes. It's got to be something eldritch and uncanny. Horrible.
I'm trying to remember some of H.P. Lovecraft's favorite words.
How about hippocephalic? No, that refers to the shantank birds. He's Lovecraft is heavily into things being unspeakable, unmentionable, and unthinkable.
Nate, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I actually invested a few moments Googling sea hounds because it mentions, that you hear their call on the wind. And I was like, what is that? Some kind of like, semi-ocean, like semi-aquatic, monster beast that plagued the shores of England at some time, or what's up? But I didn't really find anything because I literally spent 5 minutes on it. But yeah, I'm with y'all that it sounds like, he came to check up, found out that, with a twang, you hear his tie to Devon get cut. And so, despite his desire, when the wind blows, it drags him away, on this, whatever this mission is. Because clearly he's on a mission, it relit the fire inside of him that, well, okay, if there's nothing in Devon for me, I realize that these people are not going to understand who I
Well,
am.
again, you say that, but there's no hint in the poem. There's not even a word that says they either didn't understand or didn't say anything, didn't know anything. They just don't live the life he lives.
When it talks about the fire in his eyes, it's like it to me draws like a separation between him and them. They kind of all gather around him in wonder, but then this these deep pools that drown unthinkable things.
I agree. I agree. There's clearly
he's been set apart now.
He's a man
apart.
There's clearly a barrier between him and them. He's seen things and done things, and it's changed him. And I think the point of the poem is, you're right. He can't go back again. He can't fit into that old life again. I agree with you there. I had to look up the word barracoon, despite my pride in having a big vocabulary. That's one I didn't know.
Barracks, yeah, I had to check that one as well.
It's barracks. It's an enclosure where black slaves were confined. For it's a Spanish word.
There was shoot. Oh yeah, one thing. An interesting, just one of those moments where he takes just two words and puts them together. It creates a fascinating effect. The second stanza, they and in the tavern silently they thronged about him there, and silently enthronged. Like those two do not belong together, and like sticking them together like that is like just even that is a really weird and eerie idea. And
the picture painted, of course, is that they're so silent, they're so awed by this guy because he looks like a ghost. The poet says it twice. It's so silent in the tavern you can hear the rafters creak. Usually taverns are filled with noise, drinking, talking, but here it's completely silent. Silent enough you can hear the boards creak because, of course, he looks like a ghost to them. He's from another, like a specter from another world, dressed in black.
Yeah, and it's just like I said, the idea of like that many, like all the people in the town coming to see what's going on and coming to like what is happening with this man, and they're watching and no one's saying a word, and it's just it's a fascinating, just those two words together creates an interesting effect.
Well, the poem doesn't say, but they must have known that the ship he was on got captured by the Spaniards. I mean, it doesn't say what they thought happened to him, but they might have thought he was dead.
And the dread pirate Roberts never takes prisoners. Sorry, I was. We just watched The Princess Bride a few days ago, so I have that on my mind too.
I once heard Gene Wolfe and Neil Gaiman interviewing each other at a science fiction convention, and one of the things Neil Gaiman mentioned when he was getting into his Hollywood part of his career was that they said the Hollywood producers and the suits said they didn't want to have another flop like Princess Bride, and Neil Gaiman said flop, and they said it didn't do well at the box office. And he says that movie that everyone has memorized the lines of. All the lines everyone has memorized. He wished upon himself then and there that God would smite him with a flop of equal obscurity. So yeah.
The,
Okay, I no idea what to say about that.
Well, it's not on topic, so sorry about that.
No,
Yeah.
it's okay. It's just like the idea that the Princess Bride was a flop.
I think that and Ghostbusters is maybe the most quoted movie of all time. You have to go back to Shakespeare before you get someone who's quoted more often for some of these modern films.
yeah,
It was a
yeah, I'm there.
there was a so one thing about the closing of this poem, and he walks, he puts on his sword, and clearly when he does that, like everyone's just diving out of his way. They don't know what he's doing, but like he puts on his sword, and like everyone's just like clear the way. He walks out, and they like watch him walk away. They lose track of him, and they briefly see him on a cliff top against the sea, outlined against the moon. And I'm just like, if this was later, I would say, like, this is a very Batman moment. But this isn't a Batman moment. Batman does Solomon Kane moments.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and if it was a Batman moment, Batman comes down out of the moon and then pummels the crap out of some unsuspecting muggers. This guy is going off, into it. He's back into the night. This is.
So you're saying that the howling sea waves that he hears is basically his version of the Solomon Kane signal that he's got to go.
Yeah.
Sound
the Kane signal.
Yeah, exactly. Except the penguins there scream Teely Key or something because they're Cthulian.
What was that? The Mountains of Madness? Was that the name of that one?
Yeah, the Mountains of Madness. There are giant albino penguins, and there's also Shoggoths and an ancient primordial city of a pre-human race buried in Antarctica.
Good Lord, that was.
Jeez.
No, it's really odd because it's a Lovecraft story, but like one again off topic, whatever. There's give me a second.
It's not quite off topic because Kane, Robert E. Howard did write in the Lovecraft background.
But it's a Lovecraft story, but like the usual thing Lovecraft does with these alien entities is they are completely alien to mankind. We can't have the faintest comprehension of their motivations, of how or what they think, of what they even are. Mm-hmm. And then in this story, you have these people find this ancient alien city. There's no aliens left. They were all driven off or killed. But there's these inscriptions, like not inscriptions. There's these carvings, apparently quite a bit of them. And just from the carvings, they intuit this several thousand-year history of these creatures. And you're like, I thought these things were supposed to be entirely incomprehensible to man.
They drew very clear pictures.
But like,
I mean, look, man, they were the guys that write IKEA manuals.
We find Egyptian hieroglyphs written by other humans a couple thousand years ago, and we can't figure out what to make of them for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Now let's be fair. I just reread Shadows over Innsmouth, and in that story, the researcher who was going to go mad before the end of the story, don't worry, sees a bit of jewelry made by the natives of Innsmouth. It's a coronet, and he can tell from the shape of the geometry of the headpiece that it speaks of unspeakable non-Euclidean spaces beyond space-time. And he can just intuit that by looking at it. So obviously Lovecraft and other members of his subspecies have special sense impressions that Muggles don't have that allows them to get extra bits of information about Eldritch abominations upon a glance. It's just the case.
Like I said, you remember that these humans we're talking about were fairly primitive by modern standards, right? So maybe their communication wasn't so great at the time. Maybe these aliens are actually really good at hieroglyphic communication because they've developed it extensively over many, many years, and they're far more advanced at it, and hence they figured out the universal tropes for visual representation.
Or they're older than the Tower of Babel.
they'd be able to tell us without a glowing cat, how to mark a nuclear fallout site for the eventual post-apocalyptic discoverers.
That was that reminds me of the C.S. Lewis Out of the Silent Planet, because C.S. Lewis, studied philology, or I guess the closest thing to an active field to do would be like linguistics, and like he gets there and he encounters these alien creatures, and he's like, I might be able to figure out like some of the universal rules of language rather than just things that happen to apply to humanity. But and that's a tangent on a tangent.
Oh,
So
I got so many more tangents about languages.
Yeah.
Like
Well, when Solomon Kane eventually got to Melicandra, I believe he killed off the rest of the Hrasa because they were monstrous. So,
oh.
or maybe not. Maybe he recognized their underlying goodness. I take it back. That was a terrible thing to say.
All I'm gonna say is Solomon Kane sounds like a Dwarf Fortress character.
A what? What's a dwarf?
He sounds like a Dwarf Fortress adventure mode character. Like, it just kind of wanders around and finds his way into all this craziness, wipes out monsters and stuff, and then sort of goes home and finds it unsatisfying. It's like, oh, there's nothing in this
Dwarf
town.
Fortress is a fascinating video game. It's the only major drawback is that learning how it's an amateur game. It's not like produced by like one of the major studios, where like you can like you build this community of dwarves, and you have to like manage, like build their fortress, and like manage like all these different kind of needs of them and trade with other people. The only real drawback, and it ends up generating all these fascinating and bizarre stories.
Well, the deal with it is that the creator of the game actually more envisioned it as a setting and story generator, and just sort of built a game on top of it, to give you interface with the stories. And so the granularity of it is amazing. Like, it simulates everything. And it keeps track of like the lives and deeds of the various, historical figures, which can be anybody who's ever done anything. Like they had this one Gorlak, who was like a small humanoid, looked like basically a Muppet with big teeth. Lives underground. He got out from underground and he lived for like 250 years and was a member of like 36 civilizations, and even like ruled one of them as a creature, by the way, who by his very nature cannot speak and is not even intelligent enough to open doors. Still became the ruler of a civilization, which says a lot about politics.
I was going to mention rulers that we've had that might fit into that. Yeah.
It's a fascinating game, honestly.
The only major drawback is that it has a very steep learning curve getting into the game.
And in fact, Solomon Kane was standing on the edge of the top of the learning curve, framed against the moon. that great cliff.
But if you want to, for a few moments amusement sometime, you might look it up on TV Tropes and read some of the stories that come out of this game. They are bizarre and hilarious and disturbing all at the same time.
With the occasional pathos.
So let's see. Sorry, I'm trying to. Let me.
How do we get back from here?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to figure out. I was like, let's see, what's in the poem?
Well, there's three segments to the poem, if you notice, because I've been rereading some of his short stories, his Conan short stories, and writing my thoughts and reactions to them as part of an ongoing series, and I'm fascinated with how well structured Robert E. Howard's thinking is, because I've read a lot of stories that weren't all that well structured. The poem is bookended by the physical description of the environment before and after. and both of them emphasize the kind of the haunting desolation of the scene. The first anecdote he says he talks about Richard Granville. That's the first anecdote. The second one is his inquiry after Bess, which is only a stanza, and then a recital of his adventures is 2 stanzas, and then his final stanza is "My feet are weary of wandering, and age comes on apace." And you have his entire life summed up in a kind of a miniature 3-act play by that structure, with the girl right in the middle, because it goes his wartime experience that was bizarre but normal. Okay, the people in the town could understand who the Spaniards were. He asked briefly about the girl, and we're told nothing about her, but his sorrow that he caused her pain. And then we hear about his adventures in Africa. I thought it was as well constructed as a triptych, as a one of those 3-panel pictures you sometimes see. And I thought there was a mild emphasis on the girl, just because she's put right in the middle of the poem, ended by the desolation of him approaching like a ghost from nowhere and then disappearing into the moonlight, back into nowhere.
Well, and the other thing with this is, like, he's, several times, let me see, his gaze like a ghost come back to life. He hears in a dream, spoke as a ghost might speak. And, like, there's this idea that either Solomon Kane is, not quite real, or else he's the only real thing there, and everything else around him is kind of ghostly.
Now, either one of those would be very interesting, because in the second case, he's trying to go home to the ghosts of the past, and he can't do it. And in the first case, he's the hero on the in the monomyth that Joseph Campbell BS'd about. I don't quite believe his theory, but I like some of his ideas. The hero always leaves the normal world and goes into the eeriness, the other world, the darkness. And when he comes out again, he's changed, and that's what this poem is about. Kane has changed and can't go home again. He wants to, but it's denied him. His fate is going to pull him back into the fight. He keeps trying to get out, but they keep pulling him back in.
Well, the call knows where you live, to give a TV tropes answer. But
hey Nate, you're sideways.
It seems like maybe the adventure has like worn him thin. It's that at this point he's been frayed so much by all this, adventure and peril and all that he's frayed. You can kind of see right through him. This whole idea of ghostly translucence of being.
And he says he's getting old. He's getting too old for this.
Yeah.
So, it's game. So would you say he's like butter spread over too much bread?
Yep, perhaps.
Do you know what I'm referring to? Or no?
It's Bilbo says when he gets endless life from an evil ring.
By the way, Nate, on my screen at least, you're sideways right now.
Mine as well.
My phone. I'm taping conversing with y'all via my phone, and it hit like 2.5%. And the charging cord is on the bottom, so where I had it, set upright, now I have it sideways.
Okay.
It's fine. It's a bit of eldritch strangeness. Tell you what, I'll turn the light in front of me off. That way you just get like my backlit silhouette with the big ear, and you can be like, whoa, craziness. That way, that way if it fails to charge and I vanish into the night, you can just make it a parallel.
So what was one other thing. Oh, go ahead.
I just had one question for you two gentlemen. Do you believe the trope that's in the poem that once you have adventures like this, you can't go home again? Is there no such thing as a happy ending, or is there only no such thing as a happy ending for Puritans, who are very strict people?
Well, not being able to go home isn't necessarily, an unhappy ending. I mean, I think that when you leave your home, you will never return there because your perspective is broadened. Your ideas become estranged from your roots somewhat, you drift.
Well, what about in
But
this?
while
What
you
about
can
in this
even
case,
return to the
though?
physical place, while you can return to the people, you are now different. They're different, and so what you remember about home is always going to be, tinged with nostalgia. It's not going to be true. And so when you return to that place and those people, you have to rebuild your life there. You don't just get to drop back in like a drop of water and just go back to the hole immediately. You have to kind of, sand and weld a little bit. There's construction that has to happen. There's rebuilding. And so you can't just go home again. You have to rebuild that home when you arrive. But it's not necessarily an unhappy thing. For Solomon Kane, it probably is.
Well,
'Cause
but what could the happy ending possibly be for a man like him?
Well,
for
and
a man
that's
like him now, no, I think
That's
for
what,
Solomon Kane, I don't think there will be a happy ending. I think there will be, backed into the corner, snarling death at the hands of some terrible creature.
now, I got
Because
another
that's the
question though,
man he is.
because uh, likening him to other fantasy writers, I noticed that Frodo Baggins can't go home again. His companions can, Moxie and Pupsy and Bipsy and whatever their names are, but Frodo is. I'm kidding. I know all their names and how to spell Unelvish. I but he has to. His wound is too great to be cured on Earth. He has to be taken over to the island of Avalon or whatever they called it in Middle Earth, to Valinor. Is it? I'm not sure it's adventure that makes you the kind of guy who can't go home again. It may be because you're touched by the supernatural. That's something you stepped into a larger world. I'm not sure.
It's also the nature of the things you confront and how deeply it affects you. And the other thing is referring, also, if you look at Frodo versus Bilbo, if you look at Tolkien, um Bilbo could go back to the Shire, could go back home, even though he carried a little bit of that world with him. He didn't know it.
Yeah.
But Frodo could go back. Bilbo could go back home, but Frodo couldn't. And I think part of the difference is the evil Bilbo confronted consistently was outside of him. It didn't. He ended up fighting a dragon and running away from goblins and orcs and enormous spiders.
Not fighting as much as stealing from. I mean, to be technically,
he was in the neighborhood.
Yes, he was standing nearby when Bard the Bowman killed the dragon. Yes, that's good enough. He gets happy the EP.
Hey, there you go.
How much XP for invading the dragon's lair, but not fighting him yourself? For provoking the dragon to go slaughter other people.
You get all the gold. 100% of the gold.
And all those people in Rivertown?
Like every D&D game, the party broke up arguing over the division of the spoils.
Well, yeah.
But,
Tolkien was true. I mean, Tolkien was right on the money, man. He knew it. He knew what he was talking about. But you're right. Frodo fails at the end of his story. The evil is deep in him. It gets its claws into him. And that may be true to a degree to Solomon Kane. He doesn't actually feel, as far as I remember, ever gets tempted or gives in because he's not, I never see his soul being overwhelmed. But there are dark things he runs into and, things that are not made of matter or energy that tries to eat him and stuff.
I'd say in terms of him being morally tried, okay, well, there's courage. But in terms of in terms of him being tried in the sense of will you join in, will you become part of this, that would be the Moon of Skulls.
It's funny, that's the first Solomon Kane book I ever read. I still have it on my shelf. Bought it when I was like 9.
Because Nagane wants him to join her and be her king, be not her king, but be king with her over this city of the mad that is howling for blood. Yeah. And he ends up rejecting her, but he admits that tempts him.
Well, he did kiss her. I mean, come on, he knows what her kisses are like, unless someone else told him. Not that I know myself. Frodo told me. No, I'm sorry. He was deep into it.
Wait, where's that? Her kiss was like an adder's fang with the sweetness Lilith had. At least, that was what my friend said. I've heard.
I wouldn't do something that's so bad. No, I think Howard crossed those lines out after due consideration.
But yeah, in terms of like
I would have done more, but then I'd be a cad. Sorry.
Rats.
But in terms of like, yeah, his own like temptation to become part of this, I think that's probably the story that brings it closest. I actually also just a couple weeks ago.
He also is a Dark Avenger. He's also like the Batman and like the Shadow and like all these other Dark Avengers from pulp and from comic books. Because in now I can't think of the name. I'm embarrassed. I can't think of the name of the story where he comes across a dead girl and he says, "Men shall die for this," and then he just spends months hunting the guys down. And he walks into the pirate house where they're staying and stands on the stairwells and kills them all as they come up. I can't remember the name of the story. It's one of the good ones, one of the better ones. He's driven. He's driven as if by inner demons to go commit acts of vengeance in the name of the Lord. That's the thing that makes him such a great character. His motivation is really pure and kind of horrifying.
Well, and it's that's the one where like the leader of the band gets away and he has to hunt him down, and that's where he ends up meeting Nlonga the first time.
I don't remember I don't remember the story well enough.
But let's see. Was there anything else? Oh,
I noticed the poem doesn't mention his stick with the jaguar head on top of it that appears in more than one story. That was given to him, I believe, by Nlonga.
Yes. Yeah, he used that to kill vampires, and he also used it to drive back some demonic, ill-described thing.
The thing that was like black gas that came out of an ancient ruin.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
But yes, they either he didn't have it with him at this point, or perhaps none of the people in the town noticed it. Because this does seem to be a little bit from their point of view, like Nate was saying.
Yeah. That's why he looks like a ghost to them. But as you pointed out, maybe he's the ghost. Maybe he's the guy who went into the underworld and didn't quite make it all the way back out again.
Well, and one other thing about this one, and it's in contrast to the stories again, the poems have consistently have Solomon Kane on the ocean or coming from the sea, whereas the stories you don't see that as much, and it's just another kind of interesting contrast.
Yeah, he's clearly a sailor here, and I don't get that from the stories.
Although, if he's hunting down these horrible brigands from England and he hunts them all the way to Africa, at some point he's clearly on the ocean.
Yeah,
you can get there by land.
Not if he's going from the Azores to Cuba to.
No, you're not going to get there by land. I mean, the Channel Tunnel was in there, right? That was built in like 1456.
Let's see. Wait, right? No.
Right. In fact, it was bored. It was bored out by a Cthulian by one of the Elder Spawn. That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. See, they just built a road through it in modern times because cars.
Yeah.
All
right. Yeah. Well, or perhaps this is in the same world also as Pellucidar, and he actually went.
He just goes down, takes a shortcut,
and comes back up.
Comes up again. Yeah. So I've always wondered about Edgar Rice Burroughs, because not only is he getting telepathic messages from his uncle on Mars and an occasional telepathic message from an adventurer on Venus, but his next door neighbor is a radio expert who can pick up the otherwise unknown Gridley wave and get messages from David Innes at the core of the world. Why hasn't anyone ever written a book about that guy?
Well, I think I've covered all I had to say on this. Nate, were there any more points you wanted to hit?
Uh, I mean, I could talk for a while about, Damascus steel and, how it became Toledo steel later, and his Spanish blade was probably really bitching to look at with that nice, that nice little wave, probably water pattern in it, which is interesting for a legendary sailor slayer, sailor slash slayer. But
And also
yeah,
legendary
no, it
slash
doesn't really
slash
fit in
slasher.
here. Doesn't really fit in here.
Oh, I just realized there was one interesting note in the poem, and it's passed by fairly quickly. But at the end of his recounting of his fight alongside Richard Grenville, we should have blown her hull apart and sunk beneath the main. And it's like, we should have all died rather than let them take us. And it's like, what did they do after they got you?
Spanish racks, man.
They were Spanish, yeah. I mean, come on, Inquisition, torture.
I mean, Solomon Kane's supposed to be a tall guy, right? Well, now you know how he got that way.
That's right. His name was Shorty before this. It was terrible.
Yeah,
That's why they didn't recognize him. Yeah. The funny thing is, if you had asked me if I had one last comment, I also was going to mention the Spanish blade because, of course, at the time when Howard wrote that, most of the schoolboys reading these stories would have known about Toledo steel blades and how cool they were, and how they were. It was part of the lore of it's the kind of thing that kids would know the same way they would know the Robin Hood stories or the King Arthur stories. It would just be part of the background.
Yeah, and it's like, where did he get that blade? Because he's talking about, his fight on, with the Revenge, is it? Talking about, his fight at sea, and he beat him back, they beat him back with broken blades, right? So the sword he left with is not the sword he came home with, and these things are rare and valuable.
My theory is that as he was on the Spanish rack, a vulture came down to peck at his eyes. He grabbed its throat bite with his teeth, strangled the vulture to death, and then used the carcass to beat the Spanish Inquisitioner who came back into the cell, took his blade, and escaped dressed in his cassock. That's my theory. Now, Howard never wrote that story.
I wasn't going to go as detailed, but I was saying if he had been on the Spanish rack, he had to escape somehow
from Spain.
And so he obviously managed to fool one of the jailers, get his sword, slash his throat with it, and then single-handedly fight his way out of the prison. So,
which would be par for the course for a Robert E. Howard character. I mean, Conan has done such things when he gets arrested. In fact, the only way to arrest Conan is to make sure that he's drunk and he runs into a wall of his own free will, knocking himself out because no one else is badass enough to take him down.
Well, apparently you can arrest Griner fairly easily, but that's a different author entirely.
Your vulture choking story reminded me of Griner's method of escape. I was like, are we gonna get an anatomy lesson on vulture?
That's from Comes Now a Witch. That's from a Conan story where he's being crucified on the tree of Woe. And one thing I liked about the Conan movie is they put that scene in, even though it's not from that story. So kudos to them. And they finally made a Solomon Kane movie, but as you gentlemen both well know, now you know because I've complained about it. It was not the real character. They didn't copy. They didn't do it right.
They used the name.
Redone.
Well, the other thing is you have to, in order to have a Puritan Avenger, you have to actually care about you have to have some kind of connection to the ideas of Christianity and what is this version, what is that version.
I will agree in part and I will disagree in part. I think if you got the Japanese guys who did the anime Goblin Slayer and really had that voice actor do the voice of Solomon Kane, those are guys from an Oriental culture who, while they've had contact with us for a while, they at least understand what the idea of a monomaniac is like, what a fanatic is like, and that's what the appeal is of the Kane character, is that once he's on the trail of some evil pirate or supernatural monster, nothing is going to deter him. uh, his tenacity is superhuman. He's not stronger than normal. He's very strong, mind you, but it's his spirit that's unbreakable. Even the torturers of Spain couldn't break him. So, I think it could be done. I think it probably needs to be done by the Japanese as an anime, only because they seem to be doing a lot better with even things like superhero comics than some Americans are doing these days. You have to understand nobility. You have to understand drive. You have to understand. You also, to do Howard Wright, you have to actually understand cynicism, because Solomon Kane lives in a very cynical universe where there's not much light and hope in there, Christian or not. The things he comes across are all dark and diabolical.
Well, it's there's on TV.
It's a film noir sort of story. If you take my meaning, if you understand what I mean by that phrase.
Yeah.
Well, and also on TV tropes, there's another entry. What is it? Devil but no God, where the story has a character talks about an entity very much like Satan, but you don't really see God so much, and the atmosphere of these stories fits that, even if Solomon Kane is a Christian.
Well, that's the Lovecraftian background. Is there's devils but no gods. There's a magical jackal-headed stick can drive back a vampire, but a crucifix won't do much.
He didn't. Did he try one?
I don't. He's a Puritan. He's not going to carry a crucifix.
Oh well, I mean, yeah, but he could do a cross. I mean,
cross. They don't work. Sorry, my Catholicism is showing. I'll try to be nicer in the future.
Okay. So yeah, I think we've covered this one pretty well. So unless we have any closing comments,
Toledo Steel has its origins in India.
Well, for that, I would. For those,
what has its origins in India?
Oh, the Toledo / Damascus steel.
I would have to defer on questions like that to a YouTube channel like Shadiversity, which is a very fun YouTube channel if you haven't seen it before. He talks about all kinds of questions about weapons and like fantasy weapons and fantasy stories, and what kind of weapons actually would work well for a centaur or a snake person or whatever.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a pretty fun series.
That actually sounds like fun.
It does sound neat. I do have a parting comment. I noticed that in the old days, authors who regularly wrote novels also wrote poems, like Robert E. Howard. As far as I can tell from my own reading, this is just my own amateur opinion, I don't recall much poetry after World War II. Like World War II killed it off. Maybe it just didn't seem to be. It didn't seem to be the kind of thing that would appear in a normal everyday magazine. I mean, I know there's still literary people who study their own particular brand, but this was something that was, for your average fantasy reader. It was first published in the Fanciful Tales of Time and Space, 1936.
Yeah, and the other thing with that, I've found it's probably safe to assume that most men of letters up through the early 20th century, anyone who, is known for writing in any form, probably wrote poetry as well.
I noticed Tolkien did it. I noticed C.S. Lewis did it. I noticed G.K. Chesterton did it. I noticed that other members of the Lovecraft circle.
Lovecraft did as well. I recorded one of his poems in honor of Robert E. Lee. So
yeah. So those days will come again.
Well, I hope so. That's kind of, in a way, that's kind of one of the reasons I'm doing this series and recording the series of poems. I'm trying the way, and I've said this before, the way poetry is taught and the way poetry is written today is just a disaster.
It's fallen into the hands of the same people who are busily ruining comic books and Marvel movies and Star Trek and Star Wars. It's the same group. They just got to poetry first. They got it in our parents' generation and our grandparents' generation.
Yeah, and it's like once you've really gotten into like Chesterton's Lepanto or
Yeah.
Siege of Vienna Raised, you're like, this stuff can grab you, this stuff can move you, this stuff can send you places, and I think we need to get that back.
Yeah. Poets dive deeper than prose does, and the shallow philosophy that governs our world now doesn't like it. And if only Solomon Kane would come back, he could stab them with his Spanish blade and send their screaming souls to bloody hell.
Well,
that would be cool.
The question
I will
is,
hide in a box though, because I'm a Catholic, and so he'd probably be after me too. But I like the guy. The guy.
But the question is, though, how many of them would the Spanish blade work on, and how many would he have to pull out the cat-headed stick because they're not actually human?
Not of this earth. Hey, I saw a lot of news reporting that I was sure came from the Me Go just this last week. So I will make no more comment about that.
Okay, well, I think we've covered it. Thank you guys for joining me tonight, and I will be closing off. Good evening.
Good evening.